Okay, check. Thanks for your patience, everyone. The world of technology. Oh, no, come on. Let's get rid of that. There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to my studio. My name is Michael Markowsky. Thanks for your patience while we overcame a few technical glitches. Today we are going to probably approach the most important single concept in all of painting. It's a concept that probably most beginners have never heard of, and a lot of professional artists also struggle with. And this is something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about, and over the past 2 years, where we've been painting together twice a week and made 182 paintings together, that I think we've come to a pretty good understanding about how these principles work. We've seen them in action. We've tried and tested them over and over and over again with some of the world's greatest paintings, and coming to understand how all the great masters of art either used these principles or deliberately defied them, right? Because once you understand it, you can incorporate it, you can use it, you can master it, and you could certainly also turn it on its head and do different things with it to cause the viewer to feel certain things that might sort of like to cause maybe some discomfort, for instance. And we looked at that when we've talked about various different paintings, like the Yoshitomo Nara painting or Edvard Munch's Scream. A lot of artists 100 years ago were inverting this principle in order to create some very interesting effects. But we want to learn the rules before we break them. So today, what we are going to be talking about, drum roll please, is color temperature. So color temperature. I think this is the most important principle that we can really, if we can grasp this principle, it's going to make so much of painting so much easier and so much more exciting, because once you understand how painting works, then it's a lot easier to play with it, right? It's like understanding the rules of any kind of a game. If you don't understand the rules, it's not very fun because you're constantly making mistakes, right? And you're getting sent to the penalty box or whatever, right? Once you understand them, then you can excel and even become a master yourself. So here we have what we're going to do today is we're really just going to focus on one thing throughout the entire episode. We're going to understand, we're going to define the concept. What is warm and cool colors? How do we identify a warm and a cool color? How do we know the difference, right? And then we're going to spend the majority of the class doing a number of different little demonstrations just to show you warm and cool colors in action. So I think that's really, really exciting. There's a few different things that we haven't quite done before. So stick around. It's going to get really, really cool here. Okay, so step number 26, warm and cool colors. Let's just introduce the concept, and I'm doing this in its most basic, simple form for beginners. As we talked about in the previous episodes, color is a gigantic topic that is a contested field that's been contested for over 500 years, with artists having very different opinions on how it works and all that kind of stuff, how the color wheel works. But what we're about to discover here is every color has a temperature, and it's a scientific fact, right? So, as I just said, all colors are either warm or cool. Every single one of them. Except white and black. And there are some white and black warm and cool. There's some warm and cool whites as well. They're fairly uncommon. You probably won't see them in your art supply store unless you really look closely, and they're usually in premium brands for high-end artists. So your basic set of paint that most beginner painters are going to buy, everything that I recommended to you back in the very first episode, most of those sets of paints have black and white, which are a neutral color. They're not warm or cool. But everything else, all the other colors, when we think of color, like hues, like red, blue, green, yellow, purple, etc., all of those colors, within each hue, we have warm reds and cool reds, warm yellows and cool yellows, and so on and so forth. And I think that's really important. People will have argued with me about this forever here on YouTube, but I've never had another professional artist. I teach at the best art school university here in Canada. I've never had a disagreement with another professor about this principle. It's the only time I ever hear anyone disagree with this is people who are just beginning and who've maybe watched something else on YouTube. And I have no control over what other people say or think or believe. And then they come to my channel and say, "Oh no, I was listening to somebody else. They said, oh, you can use, there's a neutral blue or a neutral green." And what do you say? Anyway, every single color is either warm red or like warm or cool. It might be very close to the edge of the knife there, right? But it's either going to be on one side or the other. Which is why when I chose the colors that we use for this class, I chose colors that were deliberately spaced out, that weren't right on that line. And we'll look at some colors that are pretty much right on the line, and that's why I don't recommend them, because you're not going to get the intensity, the chroma that we want of when we mix those colors together. Okay, so what is the difference between a warm color and a cool color? Because it's fine to say, okay, there's warm and a cool color. Sure, I agree with you. I'm along for the journey so far. A warm color contains orange or red pigments, right? So it will lean towards orange and red, right? Whereas a cool color contains, again, even just one little sprinkle of salt in the soup, one little bit of green or blue pigment, right? So it's going to pull that color towards one side of the spectrum, either warm or cool. And it can certainly be very difficult to determine the difference just by looking at them, and we'll see a few different kinds of ways to help that situation. So for instance, and there's a couple of links on the web here that we'll look at. If we just see this color wheel, this is the color spectrum, right? You know, some people would say, okay, I want to pick a yellow right here. I want to pick a red right here, a blue right here, maybe a green or a violet, right? One right in the middle. And you could certainly do that, but as we saw when we were mixing the color wheel over the last few weeks, it's best to have a warm and a very distinct warm and a cool, because we can also blend those colors together. So if we look at, here's the color wheel that we did, or this is the color selection we talked about before. Rather than trying to find a yellow right in the middle, and there's probably one that's pretty close, I don't know exactly what it is, we've deliberately chosen colors that are a little bit further away, one that's warmer or cooler, or sorry, cooler or warmer. So when I say a warm yellow, that warm yellow is already on its way to becoming an orange, right? It's already got orange-like pigments in it. That's why when we mix a little bit of warm red into it, just goes and becomes a really nice, bright, saturated, high chroma orange, right? On the other end, if we take this cool yellow, it's already got a little bit of greenish quality to it, greenish pigment, which as soon as we put a little bit of cool blue into it, it goes right into the lime green, right? And it does that much more effectively than the warm yellow would, for instance. Right? So we can cover this whole spectrum with these two colors. And where are we here? And then again, so for instance, when I said, you know, there are some colors that are pretty close to the knife's edge between warm and cool. Cobalt blue, even though it's technically a warm color, it does sort of hover pretty close to that line, right? So you could see it sort of lives between our cool blue and our warm blue. And again, so same sort of thing here, right? There are some reds that exist in between our warm and cool reds, but as we talked about in a previous episode, when I mixed my colors to a previous color wheel, I've talked about this before, so I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I think just, again, as a quick refresher, because I know not everyone's going to watch the first 3 episodes here, this is a color wheel where we get nice saturated colors. This is one that I mixed previously where, yes, technically this is a cooler red that I put in here, but not quite cool enough, and therefore the resulting mixes were just kind of muddy and just not that much different than what my actual warm red got, right? So using the colors that are again a little bit further on the color wheel are going to get the effects we want. So one might again say, okay, that's great, sure, I'm still following along, I'll just take your word for it, Michael. I have seen other things that disagree with you, but let's just see where you're going with this. So why is this important? Why is it important for us to understand warm and cool colors and then to use them effectively? It's because warm colors appear to advance towards the viewer, right? So if you're making a painting, where's a painting here? Let me grab. Got tons of paintings. So this is this is Cornelius Krieghoff painting, right? If we think of the surface of a painting as like a window, right? The warm colors are going to come closer to the window. They appear to pop out towards us, whereas the cool colors recede. They go into the background. They go behind things, right? So by putting the cool colors in, they seem to go further and further away from the viewer, further and further from the window that we're looking through into the depths of the painting. So by using warm and cool colors correctly, we can create depth in our paintings. We can create the illusion of space in a painting. And generally, that's what most artists want to do. Most artists want to create the illusion of some sort of three-dimensional space on a flat surface, on a canvas. So there might be the other people like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I just want to make abstract paintings, so I guess I don't have to pay attention to this. I guess I'll just tune out right now. Whoa, whoa, whoa. This also applies to abstract painting, and if anything, is even more important for abstract painting, because if we're making abstract paintings, that means we're taking out the signifiers of meaning of, like in this case, a person here, right? If we take this person out and we just have swirling colors, which is cool, like for instance, well, here we've got a Pierre Mondrian painting. Got to make sure I get it right side up, right? So here's a Mondrian painting we did a few weeks ago. If you don't have any recognizable imagery, color is really one of the main things you have left, and you've got to use that color to its most efficient, most effective use, right? Otherwise, then it's just going to be a mess, right? So we are going to really dive into warm and cool colors today. The other thing, maybe just real quickly, why this is important is, and I don't think I created a page for it, but if you understanding how warm and cool colors works also makes your job much easier when you're trying to mix a color, when you're trying to identify colors in other people's paintings, like we've been doing in this master study course, right? Because we can just look at a painting and we can just say, okay, well, let's see, let's get another one out here. So here is a George Bellows painting, Dempsey and Firpo, that we did, right? We can just sort of look at the painting, and you can do this painting yourself if you like, and say, okay, well, that's in the background. So we want a cooler, darker color in the background. Oh, these guys in the foreground? Oh, we want warmer colors on them, right? So it simplifies the process of trying to mix colors, because if you just like, well, I got two blues on my palette, which one do I use? Well, you just decide, are we painting the foreground or the background? Foreground being the things that are closest to us, background things that are in behind those things that are further away, right? So understanding warm and cool colors simplifies that whole process of it helps get you at least into the ballpark, and then from there we can use other tools to identify those colors. So learning to look at color and immediately determine whether they're warm and cool, if we just look at random color swatches, that is a little bit more difficult to do. You know, it's sort of like a musician hearing a sound and going, oh, that's a G sharp. And you're like, what? How on earth do you get that? Oh no, actually, no, that I think that's a C. That's middle C on the piano, I hear. I'm like, what? That's crazy. But you can see that there's, you probably, maybe some of you watching right now know how to do something like that. I don't know how to do something like that, but I can look at colors and I can pretty much identify where it exists on the color wheel, whether it's a warm and cool color, but I know that is pretty difficult for a lot of people. So there's a few different tools that I'll show you here. So for instance, there is this excellent link here. Let me oops, come on. Oh, how come that didn't? Oh, okay, so this I didn't go to the exact right page on there, but we'll find it here because it is under, I think it's experience color. So this website we're looking at right now is the gamblincolors.com website. And it's an American website, so there's no U in colors. So this is the paint brand that I use when I paint with oil paint. It's a professional, super high quality oil paint. The Robert Gamblin, the man who founded the company, used to be the head restorer at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., the American National Gallery, and he did all of the restorations of paintings, and he would spend all this time fixing paintings that were cracking and falling apart, and after working there for, I think, 30 years, he sort of retired from there and started up his own paint company. I've been to their headquarters in Portland. It's a really awesome little factory. Let me see. So you can see here, cool. Where's the... Let me just grab this website. Let's go to a different page here. Sorry. Should have had this all queued up, shouldn't I? Okay. So here we are. This is what I wanted to do. I thought I'd be able to find it on their website. Obviously not. But here we go. If we look at this website, it's got, you can change the way that this is organized. If you want to just look up a color and then it'll tell you whether it's cool or warm, and what color family it lives in, or what hue it belongs to. So hue is sort of the overarching name for a color like red. So you have different kinds of red, but red is the hue, right? So, or the family that color exists under. And then we can see the temperature. So you could go by alphabetical order here. One thing I like to do is click on color family and then click hue temperature. That way it's going to group all of the cool blues together, etc. So this is a great little website. So, but you can see 93 colors. Now there's some, you might look it up, some of your colors that you might have with you right now, and go, huh, I can't find my tube of paint on this. And that's because I know it's frustrating, but different companies will name different colors slightly different names. You know, I don't know why they do that, but they do that. It's super frustrating. But for the most part, they do try to use similar names for similar colors to help make it a little bit easier on people. Okay, so I just thought I might kind of help this process out just by simplifying things a little bit for people. So your most common warm colors are as follows, and there's 2 pages for this here. So we'll start out with our yellows, and some of you may be familiar with some of these colors. Probably the majority of people watching right now, if you're a beginner painter, all of these names go right over your head like, I have never heard of any of this stuff. But a few things, so if we just look at these yellows, again, you could see gold, for instance. We think of gold as a really bright, shiny color, but it's actually a very warm color, right? It's actually the color that I've tried to choose for these master study colors, right? This is technically, this font color is pretty close to gold, right? If we wanted to make it look reflective, that's a whole other thing, and make it look shiny. But this is a warm color here, and it's also the same warm color that we've been putting on our paintings at the very beginnings of paintings. Actually, or we will. Some of you are like, what? I don't remember. But all of these colors, they're all very earthy yellows. Earthy means sort of warm and a little bit brownish, right? Kind of like, when you think of like an earthy color, it's sort of like kind of a muddy, not muddy, but sort of, if you just think of kind of the earth being dirt-like, right? Oops, let's just come back here. Where is that? Okay. So violet, we can also have, so maybe, you know, we can have warm purples. So oddly enough, a warm purple is going to be very close to our warm blue, right? So this manganese violet exists right over here. It's a warmer purple, warmer violet. And then as we get closer over here, we're going to have cooler violets, right? Let's look here. So I think naphthol red is, I think that's the color that we use for our warm red. And there's naphthol scarlet. You know, there's little slightly different mixtures here. Cadmium red. You'll see that there's some cadmiums that are also cool, mostly when we get to the yellows. Most of the time cadmium red, because often cadmium, you might hear it described as cadmium light, cadmium red light, cadmium red deep, cadmium red medium, and so on and so forth. Most of the time, those are all very warm reds. And then Naples orange, you know, it's a very reddish orange, right? So all these are very warm colors because they all have, they're leaning towards, right? They're pointing this way towards the orange, right? So even though this warm blue is right over on the other side, it's still warm because it's moving away from these greens, right? And it gets a little confusing here because these two crisscross and go the other way. But this is the burning center of our warm colors. Okay. Let's just take a look at some greens and blues and browns here that are also warm, right? So there are warm greens, right? And those warm greens, you know, again, if you think of like probably the olive green, when you think of an olive, it's very different than a lime, right? Olive green, you know, exists right over here. So it doesn't have the saturation of a cool green, right? It's probably made with warm yellow and warm blue, right? So all of these colors in here, these are your warmer greens, right? Because they're being pulled towards the warmer side of things. On the other, also a lot of browns do tend to be warm, right? So we have this kind of a longer list of browns under the warm colors. But like last week, we also did a cool brown and a warm brown, because there are cool browns just as there's warm browns, right? Every color is either warm or cool. And again, people will argue. I've had people say, no, blues are always cool, or red is a warm color. And I don't know what to say when people argue with me like that, but people do. So here we have, you know, Venetian red, which is almost, it's a very reddish brown, kind of earthy orange. Again, when you just hear that term, earth orange, right? Think of like something that's very brownish. Then we have these siennas, right? Raw and burnt sienna and burnt umber. Think about that color being burnt, right? Because at their heart, right, many of those pigments were actually kind of, they were burnt, and we would use the kind of the leftover like coals of this pigment to make paint with. Ultramarine blue is absolutely 100% a warm color. Again, I've had people argue with me about ultramarine blue, and they will be adamant that it's a cool color. I say, go right ahead, use it as your cool color. And when you don't get the mixes you like, then come back and use it as a warm color. And so cobalt blue, which exists, you know, kind of right in between here, right, is still a warm color, although it, you know, some people would call it cobalt blue a primary blue, which is nonsense, but people will call it that, right? Even because it exists very close. We can kind of mix these two colors together, which is what we did when we did the Blue Boy by Gainsborough just last week, right? And then we have a Van Dyke brown, which is a very classical black that artists like Vermeer and Rembrandt would have used, because it's almost black, but it's still got a little bit of earthy, warm, earthy qualities to it. We'll talk about the different types of white next week, because next week we're going to be looking at values, which is kind of the second most important principle of painting. There's probably a few people out there who, art teachers, who would say it's even more important than what we're talking about today, but I think it's a little bit of an easier concept to grasp than color temperature. So we'll tackle that next class. So we've been, sorry, I didn't. This is my Van Dyke brown and warm white. So now let's take a look at our cool colors. Right, and we did have that big list on the website, which you can, on the Gamblin website, and the link is in the description below if you want to go visit those again. Maybe I'll just show that up here one more time. If you want to check out the Gamblin color temperature list. But here we are with our common cool colors, right? And again, just think of like a teal, right? And when you think of like a cool color, think of something that's like teal and turquoise, like halfway between blue and green, sorry. Or really, I guess it's green dominant is what you should really be thinking of. So it's actually greenish blue, or blue-green, either way you want to think about that. Okay, so here we have our yellows here. So all of these yellows, some people would consider many of these yellows to be primary yellow. I've heard people talk about like a Hansa yellow as a primary yellow. Hansa yellow is a lot like the yellow that we use for our paintings, right? In fact, this might even be a Hansa yellow that we're using. And it just has that really bright kind of yellow, but as soon as we add a little bit of green to it, it gets really kind of nice and lemony, right? It doesn't take much blue to make it go that lime color. Sorry, lime, not yellow. Not lime, not lemon. Although you will see people call like a cool yellow lemon. Oops, let's come back up here. Here again we have a cadmium yellow light. So this is where it might get a little bit confusing for people, is that our cadmiums sort of live in this zone, but they sort of cross right over the other side of that knife's edge there, right? So we have a cadmium yellow light, and I've even seen some Hansa yellow deep be classified as a warm yellow, but again, we're talking about colors that are right close to that knife's edge, barely one little pigment over the other. I've deliberately chosen ones that are a little bit further away from one another. Okay, so common cool colors, and probably a few people are like, what? Oh, in fact, I just for a second had a bit of a panic, like, oh no, this must be a mistake. Ultramarine violet, right? So when we're mixing, this is our ultramarine blue, but when we mix the cool red together and they crisscross in the middle, this is understanding how violet works, how purple works is really complex. But you know, when we're moving this way, it's getting warmer. When we're going this way, it's getting cooler. So our ultramarine purple is sort of somewhere in this vicinity, right? So it's moving towards the cooler colors. There's often a lot more, if you go to the art supply store and you want to buy a purple, the majority of the purple violet colors that you will see there tend to be a little bit cooler, because we tend to get sort of the more intense purples when they're a little bit cooler, right? Even though because they're moving towards this direction, towards the blues. And then, come on, where are we? Magenta. Magenta is your textbook definition of a cool red, right? It almost has that bit of a pinkish color, right? There's nothing orange about your magenta, right? That's why I've deliberately made these little breaks in between these colors, because there's no orange in it. It wants to move towards the blue and the green, right? That's why it mixes these purples together really well, right? Alizarin crimson is also a very famous cool a cool red. And I could see some people saying, oh, that's great, look at all these different, maybe I'll buy a ultramarine violet, and maybe instead of magenta I'll use alizarin crimson. Yes, you could do that, but the difference is, maybe if I just kind of zip back, actually, you know what, we'll come back to that point here in a moment. Maybe because I have another color wheel I'll show here. So next we'll just look at the greens. We have more greens that are going to be cooler because they're existing in this area. Now we can just buy a cool yellow and a cool blue, and we can pretty much mix all of those greens, but some people want to just blow a bunch of extra money, so they go and buy all of these greens, right? But like a phthalo green is a really nice green. It's a very, very intense green. It's pretty close to this type of a green. If you were just to buy it, kind of exists probably right around here if you want to buy it from the art supply store. And we got our cobalt green. You might say, a cobalt, I thought that was warm. You know, don't get confused by those names. It's where the color, how it absorbs and reflects color is what it is. Raw umber is one of the only cool browns that you can buy. Most browns, again, are much warmer. So raw umber is one of the very few cool browns that classical artists had in their palette. Because if you, there are people who will recommend like the classic palette or the classic masters palette, etc. And it's usually using mostly warm colors with a few cool colors, because 500 years ago the types of pigments that were available to artists were very limited, which is why artists focused rather on than color and instead on value. But that's for next week. We'll talk about value all of next week, right? If Rembrandt, Michelangelo, Artemisia Gentileschi were transported in a time machine to today's time and were able to go to an art supply store, their minds would be blown away by the types of colors and pigments that are available to contemporary artists. Because, you know, if we let's just imagine that this is how many colors we have today, then this imaginary scale, what they had was sort of like this number of pigments. They had such a limited amount of paint, and yet they made some of the greatest paintings in human history were made with these very limited palettes. So if they could do the greatest paintings ever with this amount of color, think about what we can do with so many more, right? And then lastly here, we'll just look at all the different blues. We want to think about our cool colors exist, or these cool blues, right? Cerulean is the color that we're using as our cool blue, but all of these, you know, the other ones we're talking about here, turquoise blue, teal blue, you know, they're already moving into this green spectrum here. And Prussian blue, which is a very, very dark, cold blue, sort of exists maybe in this area here. A little bit kind of closer towards the neutral core, but it's definitely cool. It's a beautiful color. Don't get me wrong, it's a very, very beautiful color, but it's also much darker, right? It's kind of like the color of some blue jeans, for instance. Okay. Got a hair in my tongue there. And then just lastly, you know, we looked on previously, there's a warm white, there's also cool whites, and then gray. There's often, like, Payne's gray has been used traditionally by painters to kind of create a little bit of like a rainier kind of atmosphere. Like a lot of British artists used that type of a color. And Pascal says, yeah, that's why most paintings before Impressionists seem darker. So yes, one of the reasons older paintings, classic paintings, do appear darker is a number of reasons. Yes, because of the limited pigments. Also because a lot of them were varnished, and that varnish has yellowed and made them darker. So often when we see paintings these days that they're cleaned, they often brighten up dramatically. So dramatically that often some people are like, I don't know, is that how it really looked? Because that's almost too clean. You know, like if you have a carpet that's been on, it hasn't been cleaned in a while, and then you spill something on it, and then you clean it, and like now you got a really big clean spot on the carpet. Like, oh, now I got to clean this whole thing, right? Okay, so let's just take a look at a few more things here, and then I want to get painting. So, you know, again, we've got this color wheel, and we can sort of examine all of these colors ad infinitum. And you know what? I think you know what? I think we want to just start painting here, because if I haven't convinced you yet, probably another 10-20 minutes of me talking about this stuff is not going to convince you. So if you're not convinced, then good luck. If you're kind of on the fence, then let's mix some paint and we'll sort of prove it to you. Okay. So, on the Dropbox, actually I forgot to mention a few things. There's, if you click in the video description below, you will see a folder called, it'll say a link to a Dropbox folder, and in that Dropbox folder you're going to see all of these files, like 150 folders in here. These are our beginner courses, so they're right at the top here. If we click in here at color temperature for today's episode, you're going to see these 4 files in here. Really, there's only 2 different files. There's just a PDF and a JPEG version of each one. And maybe even before I go too much further, I want to let you know that there's also a private Facebook group just for people like yourself that can upload your versions of the paintings that we create together. I encourage you to join the group and upload the artwork you're working on, whether it's drawings or paintings. It's a great community. This has sort of evolved totally organically. It was something that people just like yourself were watching, requested, and it's since been created. I also just want to mention really quickly, I did talk about this at the end of the previous episode, how to color match any color using these 2 websites. And again, they're in the description below, right next to the Dropbox folder. There's these 2 links. And I demonstrated how to do this on the previous episode, so I don't think I'll go through it right now. But it is, I use, if I'm really stuck on a color, I can just check it on here. Okay, so if we download these files from the Dropbox, you're going to see 2 files in here. Now they're basically identical, and you can print them off. Basically, you know, we have 4 on one page and 1 isolated on one page. I think for myself, what I'm going to do is just use 2 canvases. And if you don't want to use a canvas for an exercise like this, you can just use your sketchbook, or you know, regular photocopy paper might be a little bit thin if we're going to paint on it. So if you have something like, you know, here's a poster board from the dollar store. Right here you get 2 of these. They're larger sheets I've torn in half, and one side's a little bit shinier, one side's a little bit more matte, and probably, you know, you're going to get different effects on the shiny side versus the matte side. I prefer painting on the matte side, but hey, that's personal preference. Okay, so again, if you could use the big one if you want to do a whole bunch of these a little bit larger and really kind of play. I think because I want to move through a bunch of ideas at relative speed, I'm going to use the 4 on one page at one time. So the first thing I'm going to do is, you remember I gessoed these canvases, so before I use them, I'm just going to sand them down again. If you just bought your canvas and you just open it from the plastic, I don't know if I'd recommend sanding it, because you might actually fray the weave here, but you could try it. I don't know if I've ever actually even done that before. All right, you can see this is when it's drying. Sometimes it gets on the newspaper and it peels off. So I'm just going to do both of these at the same time. This is 220 grit sandpaper. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to trace these images onto the canvas here. And often I'll use a ruler to make sure any kind of line like that is straight, but this is our little demo, so I'm not super concerned about making it look perfect, but if you want, you could certainly do that. Okay. So now I'm going to use some carbon paper. I did show how you can in one of the previous episodes how you can use carbon paper, or if you don't have carbon paper or graphite paper, this is a fairly easy template to draw yourself. It's just like, you know, if I had to draw it myself, you know, you just go draw a circle on here, and here would be sort of a horizon line in behind. Right? Doesn't have to be perfect. Doesn't have to look perfect. It's the idea that's important. Most people are not going to be hanging their little demo piece on their wall and charging money for it and hoping it gets exhibited at the National Gallery. Okay, so I just realized that this was upside down. So you want the side that is shiny facing down, because that's the graphite. I did that last week. I think it's because the previously, for a year before that, I was using double-sided carbon paper, so it didn't matter if one side was up or down, because they were both allowing the carbon to go down onto the surface. I could use a ruler for all of this, but I'm not going to. Now, I did include these little radiating, like I'll just draw one on here for some people, because we will use, maybe I was going to just eyeball it myself, but you know what, maybe just so that anyone who's watching, if they want to stay on the same page as me, I'll draw them out so that we're all working from the same place, right? Trying to avoid the confusion that comes with learning something new for the first time. You know, I know that this might not be the most exciting sort of exercise you could ever do, but if you really want to learn how to do this and you want to get good fast, then learning this stuff is so important, so valuable. So all of those of you that are watching right now, and who will actually go to the trouble of doing this, are going to be so much more comfortable painting than the people who are like, yeah, I think I understand it. I could just watch and I'll probably get it. Yeah. Alright, so that's what that looks like. It's not pretty. We're going to fill it with paint here shortly, and we're going to do a few different versions of it. I just realized, why did I print two of these when I could just use this a second time, which is what I tell people to do? I don't know, Michael. I do not know. There's that part of my brain that is just sitting there observing everything I do and just shaking its head, like going, I don't know what this guy's thinking. He's just, I have no idea. So we'll just, I know it's a little bit tedious watching me do this. I was hoping to do this before today's episode began, and then I had all sorts of tech issues getting started, which is very stressful. But I had a little sip of tea, rebooted the computer a few times, started a little bit late, but you know what? The important thing is we're all still alive. And I saw there was I didn't get a chance to read the content of the chat, but it looked like a bunch of you guys were having a spirited conversation, so, which is often what happens here, is before each episode people tune in a little bit early and say hello. And it's been really cool too, just over the past few weeks. So many new people have been joining the class and posting their artworks onto the Facebook group, artworks that we did a while ago. And I don't know, it just makes me, I'm always just so blown away by that there's this community of people that have been created here. Okay, so let me clean up my little mess here. You know, artists are often, the cliche of an artist is like super disorganized and stuff all over the place and a big mess. And there are certainly famous examples of that. Like, look, I think probably the most famous example would be an artist named Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon was an Irish artist who died, I think, in the 80s, 1980s, and had like a famously, incredibly, disastrously dirty studio, which they disassembled after he died, and it's you can see it on permanent display in, I think, in the National Museum of Art in Ireland. So anyway, so what do we want to do today? There's so many different ways that we can do this. I think the first thing that I want to do is I want to paint I want to do the sort of I want to try putting the warm and cool colors in, like, I want to be able to put them side by side and sort of put one of them in the quote-unquote the wrong place, just so we can see them side by side, right? So let's get some paint on the palette. Because nothing works better to convince people of something than when you see the alternative, right? Because if I do it one way, people are like, yeah, you know, sure, but I bet you if I did it, I could make it work. And, you know, just the other day when we painted the Thomas Gainsborough's Blue Boy, he used a cool color in the foreground deliberately as sort of a provocative gesture, and he wanted to see if he could actually make it work and to, like, show up his great rival, Sir Joshua Reynolds. I think it's super interesting how, like, the history of art, just as like the history of a lot of things, comes down to like personal spats between different people, and that leads to new discoveries, etc. Okay, maybe I will take a little bit. I might use actual black today, even though we can mix it ourselves, just to kind of speed up this process, because I know for some beginners this can be a little bit tricky. So let's get a paintbrush out. What size do I want to use? Maybe I'll just use a little bit of a larger brush, because I don't care about these paintings that we're about to make as great paintings. I just want to understand the principles here. Now, often one of the things that I do almost at the beginning of every episode is coat these with another color, either my warm yellow, and put down what's called the imprimatura, and I think I will do that on one of them. I was trying to think about through all of this over the course, so, but let's do, you know what, I'm going to do that when we get there, just so I don't realize. Okay, so what I want to do to start out with is I'm going to paint this ball here. I'm going to paint it a warm blue. I'm going to paint the background a cool blue. I'm going to do the same, and then I'm going to invert it, and I'm going to have, maybe I'll do them side by side. I'll do the warm blue and cool blue in the background. So let's just take our cool blue, And I'm going to put the cool blue right here in the foreground. Okay. And I'm going to paint over here my cool blue in the background. Okay. So, because what I want to be able to show is how these two colors behave very differently, and how one color will want to recede while one color will want to advance. Okay. So, I'm trying to think, should we do that same thing with the reds? I'm going to let that dry for a moment. Just going to wash my brush. So I used my cool blue for that, right? This is my cerulean blue, my cool or cold blue, right? The one that is moving towards the green, right? It's cool. Like it will, if I put a little bit of my cool yellow into this cool blue, I'm gonna get the brightest green possible, right? Just for the next sake down here, let's do the same thing. I'm gonna take my cool red this here. And I'm going to paint this background. Okay, so now we've got, in both paintings here, a cool shape in the foreground, and on this side we got cool shapes in the background. Okay. So the next, I want these to dry. I might just hit these with the blow dryer really quickly just to speed this process up so I don't have to worry about the paint smudging and everything. So bear with me for a moment. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint with my warm blue. I'm going to put that in the background here. So these are the colors right out of the tube. Instead, now we're going to put this okay. We'll let that dry. I may even want to do the warm blue tends to be, this ultramarine blue, a little bit transparent. Okay, let's do our warm reds now, and the same sort of process here. I'm not sure. So now I'm going to take my warm red and put it in this circle here. And then I think I'm going to put some my yellows in on the bottom here just to see how they work. So I'm going to actually, I'll blow dry this again just to help speed this process, drying process up. Okay, so on this side here, I'm going to put cool yellow on the bottom, and on this side, on the right side, I'm going to put my warm yellow. So we'll put cool yellow down here. So essentially, what I want to be able to show is that the images on the left side of this picture, I mean, it's possible that things could work well on the left side, but hopefully by the time we're done, we should see a difference, very dramatic difference between the left side and the right side. Okay, so now I'm going to take my warm yellow and I'm going to paint that Feels so nice to be painting. Feels like this past month I've been busy doing other things behind the scenes for these classes, and I haven't been painting as much as I have in the past. There's been times where during each month I've done like 10 or 12 episodes, and this month we're on episode number like 5. So it seems so weird to be so much slower, or not slower, just less time in the studio. I'm working on my comic book, but okay. And I'll blow dry that in a moment, but I think actually what I'm going to do is cut a little window out of here. So that we can see. Will that work? Maybe I'll need to do this one too. We'll see. Okay, I'm gonna blow dry that. Okay, so what I want to be able to do now is to look at these and just going to put this in behind here to clean up some of my dirty background here, even just a little bit. Okay, so we want to be comparing like A and B here. So in this painting, we've got sort of quote unquote the wrong way to do it, right? We've got a cool blue on top of a blue, warm blue background and a cool yellow in the foreground. So basically everything is inverted here, right? Whereas over here, we've got quote unquote the correct way to do things. Right, we've got a warm blue in the foreground, cool blue in the background, and a warm blue on the, let's say, the table. Right, so this is intended to be closer to us than the blue and behind. Right, and by using these different colors, we should see a little bit of a difference. In fact, let's take. Just to try to isolate these from one another. Right, so in this case, let me see. Right, so this one might not seem overly, like, I think there's probably a lot of people might look at it and be like, I don't know, it's fine for me. I do think that when I look at this, there's some kind of, I think probably it helps that this is a little bit darker in terms of value, and that's something we'll talk about next week. But this cool blue, it's trying to be far in front of this blue, and they're sort of working against one another. Same sort of thing, this cool yellow it does seem closer to us perhaps than the, well, actually now I was going to say that I do feel like this blue is advancing in front of me a little bit more than this, even though like it just seems it's an optical illusion that happens, versus when we look at this one here, it seems clearer to me that this warm blue is in front of this cool blue, right? And the same sort of thing with this warm yellow on the bottom. It's coming through and supporting the warm blue that's on top of it, right? So it's possible we could take this outside and we could ask a whole bunch of different people what they think. We might have some different opinions, but if we want to think about like the actual, like, 500 years of painting, what, the vast majority, 99% of all the great artists in the past would definitely say this one is applying the color temperature principles effectively, whereas this one is, is sort of a mishmash, right? Like the colors are quote unquote in the wrong place. So if you were in an artist studio, like if you were an apprentice of Monet or someone, and you made this painting, he'd be like, what on earth are you doing? Have you not been paying attention? Right? Again, just because you make a painting like this doesn't mean it's wrong. I just want to make that crystal clear, because there are artists that would make a painting like this deliberately, even though they know how warm and cool colors work, precisely to kind of create perhaps a kind of a strange kind of feeling of slight discomfort, of confusion. Like if we paint something cool and we put it right in the foreground, we paint the background warm, which is what Edvard Munch did in The Scream, all of a sudden you might look at it and be like, wow, this painting is so weird. Like, I don't know what it is, but there's something unsettling about it. And so for the most part, most people looking at it are just think, oh, it must be the content. It must be this guy screaming in anguish, which is unsettling. But Edvard Munch was very cleverly using switching the positions of those colors to create that anxiety within the viewer of being like, there's something, I don't know anything about painting, but I gotta tell you, that painting is weird. It's doing something weird in my brain, right? And if that's your goal, then obviously master these techniques and then apply them. So let's do the opposite down here. So we used these in here again, we have quote unquote the wrong way to do it, in which we have, just see, our cool shape in the foreground and then warm color in the background, cool color in the foreground, right? Versus here, we've got our cool pink or magenta in the background, our warm red as the foreground image, and the warm yellow in the foreground on the table, right? So for me, this seems, of all that we've done so far, the clearest, that this is clearly feels to me like it's in front, right? That this is in front of this magenta background, versus here, it almost, to me, and it looks a little, I'm not sure how it looks like on your screen at home, but it could sort of look like we've got, I don't even know how you would describe it, like a shape like this hanging in front of a ball that's in behind it, right? I don't have a ball around here, but it's like a cutout shape that is hanging in front of it, kind of occluding part of the ball. So that's just the beginning of where we can take this. Now I think we'll complicate things. Maybe what I think I'm going to do is I'll leave this aside. This is very simple. I think I might come back because we can also do other things to it. I've got. Should we do a shadow? Maybe let's start this other one first. And I just want to show a few different ways that we can do this. Now, this next thing, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to apply a warm yellow here, a little. I'll just take my warm yellow out of the tube. And this is what I do typically at the beginning of every painting. And this is my muddy water that I've just been cleaning my brushes in. So it's going to be a little bit kind of darker. I don't mind that though. I don't think the overall finished quality of this painting will suffer. So I'm just going to do this on one side of the painting. So what I'm doing is I'm putting this warm yellow down, what we call the imprimatura, the first layer of paint. This is what the Italians, the great master Italian painters of the Renaissance, showed us how to do. I love this technique. Okay. And I think on this side I might do the opposite. I think I'm going to paint. If I try putting a cool yellow there, the difference is going to be very subtle. So I think instead, let's do a cool red in there instead. So just taking my cool red, mixing it up with some water just to thin it out a little bit. Ideally, you would probably use a matte medium, would be even more effective, but and I probably should have blow dry that other side because I don't want these colors to mix. Okay. I put a bit too much water in here, so I'll blow dry it and then I think brush it a little bit while I'm blow drying it. Not sure why I'm painting on this. I brought this out deliberately to give a nice clean background. Okay, here we are. Okay, so the point of what I'm about to do here is to show the difference between if we begin the painting with a warm ground versus a cool ground, right? And we can paint, I think in fact we'll paint the same sort of, I think basically I'll paint something similar to what we did here on the right, just to show we can get kind of different effects based on the colors that we put here. In fact, let me just start it and then I'll think of maybe any twists I want to add to it. Okay, so on the, I'm going to need just a little bit of white, perhaps. So let's put a warm blue in here. Let's take a little bit of white just to cover a bit of that background. Otherwise it's going to take just a little tiny bit of white. And let's do the same thing over here. Just a tiny bit of that white. The reason why I add just a little bit of white is without that white, these colors, this ultramarine blue, because it's so transparent, is just going to be so dark that we want a little bit more of that actual color to kind of come through. Now, no matter, unless you actually apply white, titanium white on its own and completely cover up these colors, there's going to be some level of color coming through these colors, which is going to change how these colors are perceived, right? Even though I just painted these same colors, right, you could see they look very different side by side, right? It's kind of amazing that, you know, they are the same color, but one looks maybe a little bit darker because it's surrounded by this light color, right? This one looks a little bit lighter because it's surrounded by this darker color. Let me just think about what I want to do next. How about let's do the warm red version. So I'm going to take my warm red, and again I'm just going to put just a little bit of white in here just to... Next week we'll talk about different kinds of white, and there is another kind of white that we could mix in here called a zinc white or a flake white, which artists have used in lieu of titanium white. For acrylics, they're often referred to as like transparent mixing white. We'll talk all about that next week. Oh, I like that a lot. Lori says, I just tuned in. The chat is quiet tonight. Everyone must be painting. It was definitely very busy at the beginning, and yeah, I think a lot of people got into the painting for sure. So let's do our backgrounds now. Let's put in a cool blue. Or should we do... I'm just trying to think if I want to invert these. I think I want to keep them consistent. I'll put a cool blue and then cool red down here. So, likewise, let's take a little bit of cool, or white, and mix this in with my cool blue. Paint it right across. So it's the same color, just going right across. Oh, and let's do the cool red below here. Okay, take a little bit of white. Right, so I'm painting cool red on top of cool red. Okay, let's let that dry. I think I actually want to, while these are drying, just apply another coat of blue back onto these here. So now I'm just going to take my warm blue. I'm just going to come back here and do this. Just darken it because it's so transparent that it's... I don't think we're going to see the colors as convincingly as they will be if they're at their full strength. Because this is, again, so transparent, it can be a little deceptive, so. Right, I think that makes it a much clearer. We can do another layer of the cool blue. Let's do this warm blue here again. And you know, we could use any combination, right? We could use greens or purples rather than just the cold red down here and the warm yellow on the right. Because just like, you know, painting your bathroom or something, you know, it's the... sometimes you need to do a second coat, and it makes a big, big difference, doesn't it? Heidi's saying hello. Hello, Heidi. I'm just going to add my cool blue that I did earlier. I also want to put this cool blue here because I don't want someone saying, it only looks that way because you did a coat of the warm blue in the background, but you didn't do the cool blue in the foreground. So I want to make sure we don't... It's a fair fight. Okay. I'll put this cool blue now on top of everything. And I'm sure some people would say, well, now what's the point of doing that? Now we can't see any of that warm or that cool red or the warm yellow now. And my answer would be, oh, you're seeing it all right. You're just not necessarily fully aware that you're seeing it, which is what all the great painters throughout history have been doing. They've been doing things that it's like a magic trick. I always think, I wrote my graduate thesis all about about essentially how art is like magic. And you know, it's the same sort of thing with the magic trick. Oh, you saw how it was done. You just don't realize it, right? Because of various different techniques artists use for misdirection. You know, putting that second coat on, it definitely is darker and it's harder to tell, but there is differences there for sure. Donna's there, Deborah's there. Wow. I saw Paula in there. Pascal. I wonder what color I should put down there on the bottom. Let's do the warm yellow, because that was what I had there above, so we can see all of these side by side, and we can just see if there's what differences there might be. Okay. So I got a little bit of blue in there, which will change things a little bit, depending on... I probably should have just blow dried it first, but... Okay, I quite like those. It is really neat seeing how colors behave when they're lit over top of other colors. I almost kind of wish I didn't put a second coat of the cool blue in the background, because I like how it looked a little bit before, but I think just for our purpose, I think it's very, very subtle. Not quite as obvious as otherwise would be, but I think it's important to see those differences. And I think just lastly, I want to do a little bit more of my warm red. Okay, I'm just going to paint over my cool pink here, because I remember I put a little bit of white in there. Oh, Donna. Just seeing the corner of my eye there, some of the struggles you've had to go through recently. And there's Tanya just tuned in. Okay. Oh, I want to do that other magenta up here. I'm not sure how well these will come across on camera because of the always a little bit interesting to see how the cameras and monitors change things up a little bit. A second coat always makes a huge difference. Like whenever you can, if you want really nice bright colors. I mean, I used to work for an artist who would do like 3 or 4 coats of the same color in different areas, because the more coats you put on there, the more pigment saturation you have, right? So because let's say the light is going down, it penetrates through the surface of the canvas, and it keeps on going all the way down the layers, right? Keeps on going all the way down until it hits the bottom, that white surface, and then bounces back up, right? So if you have 2 or 3 layers of blue, it's going to try to go through all those layers of blue and come right back up. And if you've, like in this one here, it's going all the way through, hitting that magenta that's underneath, and then coming back up and mixing optically, right? I mean, I think you probably see a little bit stronger in this painting here, maybe mostly in these blues particularly, right? Where this blue was painted on top of a warm yellow background, right? And this blue was painted on top of a cool magenta background. And you can see the difference between these two. Like, this one, especially compared to the background, arguably I might prefer how that looks, even though this is typically the process that I normally use. So that's what's, part of my selfish reason for doing this is I'm like, I wonder if I can learn something myself, because I kind of think that looks kind of cool, right? And especially here where we've almost got an orange that's mixing optically in our eyes, because we have this cool magenta and then the warm yellow over top of it, and now we've got kind of an orange, whereas we just have 2 of the same warm yellows here, one that was a little bit diluted and then a second coat on top. So I think maybe also it's worth just comparing all of these. Hold on, I gotta restart that. While that reboots up here, you see the robots, or spam bots, have made an appearance. Hello, spam bots. Goodbye, spam bots. Okay, so I wanted to see these side by side here. So here on the left we have, this is sort of the odd one out here, these two, because we have our cool blue on the, oops, my finger goes right in there. We've got, let's get a bit more paint. I didn't realize what's still wet. So we've got our cool blue in front of our warm blue, and that's really not the way that we can use the color most effectively, because, and I think it looks pretty clearly that these shapes are in front of that background. When we see it like this, if you were to ask people which shape looks like it's in front of what, it definitely looks like this warm blue is in front of this cool blue background, right? Versus here, there's a little bit of confusion, which is what we want to see. Now, down here, I'm not sure how much it shows well on camera, but, we've got our cool red shape in front of our warm red shape. So everything is sort of kind of funky over here. Whereas we have 3 versions of essentially the same painting. The main difference is that really the main difference between this in here is that this was just painted on a plain white background, versus this was painted on a background where we painted warm yellow to get started, which is how we typically do things. So just out of curiosity, it's probably more like that is what we're looking at, and trying to see if we notice any difference between the two. The main difference that I see is, this blue is much more deeper ultramarine blue, right? So again, these two sets here are almost identical, right? This one here just has the plain white background of the canvas untouched, whereas this one we put a warm yellow wash onto it. So this is a little bit more of an intense, darker ultramarine blue, right? Because we've got a bit of that yellow at the very bottom that's catching the light as it bounces back to our eyes. And same sort of thing here, right? This cool blue, there's also 2 coats of paint here, but this one just is a little bit thicker, a little bit more opaque, because again, there's a 3rd color in here. So there's basically 3 colors in all of these here, whereas really there's only 2 colors. And it's just really, or there's just 2 coats of the same color, whereas there's 2 coats of the same color plus a 3rd very different color in there that allows us to see things a little bit differently. Okay. Now, I do want to keep on going here. I'm mindful of time, and my goal is to try to keep these initial episodes to around 2 hours. So I'm just trying to think of ways that I can kind of try to speed up the ending of these paintings. I think one of the things I'm going to do is let's mix our darkest color, and let's make a little shadow under. We'll put shadows under everything here. So let's mix up our darkest possible color, which is warm red and warm blue together. If you want to just use a black, you could do that. I always like doing this. Let's mix it right here. Yeah, I'm gonna take a bunch of this warm red and cool blue because they're right across from one another on the color wheel. Remember, we did this just the other day when we mixed the inside of the neutral core on our color wheel. So I'm taking my warm red, cool blue, mixing that together. We get a really nice purple, which I also really like this color. And it makes me think about maybe even using this for some shading. But let's just take this cool yellow, and when we add that cool yellow to this color, it just turns into black. Or virtually black. It's still a little bit gray, like maybe 98% gray rather than pitch black. But I always prefer this infinitely more than the than just using black out of the tube. So I'm just going to go around. I just want to add little shadows underneath here. It's sort of like we got these little charts. Might as well make it a little bit nicer. We'll add a little hot spot of light up top as well, and maybe just a little bit of, we could do a tiny bit of glazing if we want to change these objects. You know, one thing as I'm painting this that I didn't mention, so with this right here, here I'm using the colors quote-unquote incorrectly. Does that mean that we cannot have a cool blue in the foreground, or a cool red in the foreground, or a cool yellow in the foreground? No, not at all. We can. And again, that's what we did just the other day with the Blue Boy painting, the Gainsborough painting we painted, which is explicitly answers that question, that yes, we can have cool blue things in the foreground. but it's a bit more of an advanced process in order to make that happen. It's a little bit trickier, and the way that Gainsborough did it, the way that I did it last episode, is by making sure that we're painting a cool yellow or a cool blue on top of a warm background, so that the warm color underneath is helping to pull the cold color on top of it into the foreground and preventing it from going into the background, or at least going too far into the background. And I know that might sound really confusing for a beginner painter and be like, what? That's okay. After you paint with me for a little while, you can certainly go back and watch that episode, and because that's sort of what I talk about quite a lot throughout. Because, you know, he painted that painting as a deliberate sort of show of bravado to show, because his sort of arch nemesis, his great rival, painting rival, Sir Joshua Reynolds, said it could not be done. It's just physically impossible. And like any good artist, Gainsborough said, sorry, you said it's impossible? Okay, that's a challenge. I'm taking that as a challenge, and I'm going to see if I can make it work. Tanya says, did anyone else watch David Hockney's Secret Knowledge? Michael recommended it in a previous class. I'm so excited. Did you watch it, Tanya? I love that documentary. I think it's incredible. And it really just shows what I think is incredible about that documentary is it shows you know, we're not, as human beings, quite as advanced as we think we are, and the people of the past weren't as stupid as sometimes we like to think they were. We like to think that history is this nice gradual climb forward, and we're basically on the top of the mountain looking down going, oh, look at those people, look at that, can you believe these idiots? Oh my goodness, wow. What if they only knew what we knew today? And then you watch a documentary like that, and it's like, oh, whoa. Like how did they figure all that stuff out? It's just mind-boggling. It does make it seem like at some point space aliens landed and showed us how to do everything. It's just like, if humanity relied on people like me to figure things out, we would still be using rocks. And you know, the beginning of 2001: A Space Odyssey, like just like banging, like thanks for reminding me again about that, Tanya. Rachel says, this explanation of warm and cool techniques has me on the edge of my seat. It's fascinating. That's awesome, Rachel. Certain artworks have drawn me in and I never knew why, but I totally get it now. It was the depth of the scenery due to the color choices. Awesome! That's great. If we can understand how that principle works, it will revolutionize the way that you see painting and the way that the kind of paintings you can make yourself, right? Because all you have to think about when you're mixing colors, and obviously you can complicate, and painters do, they will overcomplicate everything always, but we could look at any painting and we can just go through it and we can instantly figure out, okay, that's probably a cool color there, that's a warm color there, that's a cool color there, and then it's not so kind of like, how on earth would we ever mix something like that together? Well, you go, oh, okay, well, that's a warm red, or that's a warm orange. And then I look at my palette and I go, oh, okay, I guess I just want something like this, but I don't want it maybe quite so bright. So I'm just going to mix a little bit of the opposite color in there, and that's going to reduce the saturation, and we'll get a little closer to there, right? I'm just trying to think how much more I want to do on these. Do I want to do any quick glazing of highlights. I think I could do just a little bit. I know that not everyone has glazing fluid. So if we want to put, let's say, a little highlights and shadows on here, let me just show you kind of how we could do that. A real quick and dirty way of going about it. So we've got this nice dark mixture here, right? I think we've got 3 warm blues. So we're going to take this dark color, we're going to mix it in with our warm blue, and we can do this the best way possible. We can do this with water a little bit, but we can do it with matte medium. So there's the 2 sort of most recommended ways of going about what I'm about to do. This is if you've got glazing liquid, and I would suggest satin glazing liquid, satin or matte, it's the same thing, because I prefer for these paintings to be matte, and matte is not shiny. Satin is not shiny. I prefer them to be not shiny until I want to make them shiny, and usually a varnish will do that. People will sometimes varnish. And again, here's matte medium. It's the same sort of thing. Basically, matte medium is just paint without pigment, right? It's just clear. It looks like clear glue, and you can in fact use it like a glue. So we can use matte medium, but I think just for our purpose, I'm just going to use the proper ideal method, because if I have the materials, I think I would recommend you try to use those materials. So to glaze, I put this glazing fluid down. Let's get some of the blue that I want to use. And let's take a bit of the darker color, and we mix this together. I'm going to mix this into my blue to get a darker blue. And then I'm going to mix some glazing fluid into it. So what this is doing is it's thinning this paint out. So it's going to be pretty difficult maybe to see how this looks, but so I'm going to paint that. Right, trying to kind of get a little bit of a crescent shape going here. And if you want, you can take another brush, a brush that's very nice and dry, and just sort of go along the edge to smooth the edge out. It's going to be a little hard to see this at this moment. And I'm not going too intense. I want to kind of stay a little bit, do this kind of lightly. Just blend that out real quick. I'm going to do that again. I'm going to do this with the cold blue just for the other side here. So let's just take a bit of this darker color, glazing fluid. Even though this one right here is what not to do, it's like we don't need to make it feel too bad about itself, right? It's not, again, it's not inherently wrong. It's just maybe not ideal for maybe our purpose, but there could certainly be artists that would say, yeah, you know what, I'm gonna embrace the wrong and try to make it work. And by all means, go for it. Let's do the red, and what I'm going to do is I want to let that glaze dry, and then I can do even another little bit of an even darker shade underneath. So let's use our warm red. let's do it right down here. Let's take our warm red there, our dark color here. Bring that glazing fluid in. I'm doing this. This is the quick and dirty 10-minute glaze process, right? Obviously, we spend a little bit more time doing this in other paintings. I think you could see it a little bit more dramatically here than you could on the blue. The other thing that's nice about that glazing fluid is because it's got a bit of a slow dry property to it. It allows me to do just what I just did there, sort of wipe things away if I'm not happy with them. Not sure how well. Can you see that? Okay, I'm just going to motor along and do all of these. Right, one of the things I love about glazing, I always think of it, I always call it like the timid artist's favorite tool. Because what's great about glazing is we can do super thin glazes, and we can do lots of them, and it's very forgiving, because if you're doing super thin layers, then you just keep on slowly adding a little bit here and there. And that's the secret to, most famously, like the Mona Lisa. Right? The Mona Lisa, there's dozens, if not hundreds, of super thin layers of paint. And by painting those super thin layers of paint, Leonardo da Vinci is able to get this paint the smile of the Mona Lisa in such a way that we cannot see any brushstrokes. And some people love that, right? It stunned people when it was originally done. Is glazing fluid different from blending gel? That is interesting. I've never heard of blending gel. Gel is usually probably like what it sounds like, maybe a little bit thicker versus fluid. Like I don't know what you're like. Like, can you hear that? It's not like water, but it's like what would you say that sounds like? It's kind of like a thin yogurt, right? Whereas gel, I imagine being a little bit more like hair gel, like kind of a little bit more like a syrup. I don't know. I'd be interested to hear. I mean, it's possible that it works just as well. I've never used it, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't work or one shouldn't try. Let's do this one more time. I want to get a little bit of this cool red. Here. Okay, so that's my darker colors. Tiny says, I bought it with my Artist Loft paints. Probably from Michael's or Hobby Lobby. Probably, I think it should be fine. Blending gel. I'm curious. What I bet you blending gel is like, if I just guess off the top of my head, I bet you it's like a glazing fluid a little bit, but it's probably more along the lines of a slow dry medium. I bet you that blending gel looks like a paint medium. I bet you what they mean is it slows the drying time down so that you can blend the colors a little bit easier. I bet you that's what it is. So I bet you on the back of that label it might say something like it keeps the paint open or wet longer. Okay, so let's put some highlights on here. And usually what I do is try to blow dry all these, but let's just plow ahead in terms of time. Let's do the warm blue here. So I'm going to take some warm blue. Let's do this right by the white. Let's take some white here. And let's put our I'm going to mix this in. Now, again, we're just right now doing really one step of a glazing process. You know, we could do many, many layers here and build up a really gorgeous kind of illusionistic effect. We did that with the Magritte's pipe, the very famous "This is not a pipe" image. Let's put a little bit more of it in here. Let's do that again. Yeah, we'll fix that. We'll let it dry, and then we'll come back to it. The problem is I've just put too much glazing fluid down, and it got jammed up my brush. So when you're glazing, these layers should be thin, rather than putting big blobs of paint all over the place. Yeah, not my best work. We'll let those dry. I would say, Tanya, having glazing fluid would be, if you really want to be able to paint great paintings like the masters, like we're doing in these episodes, glazing fluid will make a huge difference. It's possible, there are dozens of artists, very famous artists, mostly contemporary artists, who do not use glazing fluid, that wouldn't even know how to use it if it was given to them, and that's totally fine. But if you really want, for this class, like, one of the things that I want to show people is how to paint essentially any painting, and if you have glazing fluid, it allows you just to do so much more. Because what we're doing, like, glazing fluid is, like, first of all, glazing is one of the oldest painting techniques that exists, because it was one of the only ways that artists could create these transitions of light and dark, right? Because paint 500 years ago, painting was such still such a primitive technology. Like, it's hard for us to understand, but you know, it was just like, I mean, artists were grinding their own pigments. They were, you know, taking bugs and blood and, you know, just anything they could find, and they would mix it together with, sometimes with their own spit. And you know, it might look great for like a few months or a year, and then just suddenly fade and the color would disappear, which is also, you know, when Pascal said, you know, maybe that's why all those old paintings look so dark. There's lots of reasons, one including the light fastness of older paintings, right? They were just using a lot of organic pigments that just faded really quickly. And can you imagine how frustrating that would be to work on a painting for months, and it looks great when you deliver it to the king or queen of Spain or France, and then you get a call. You know, somebody shows up at your door and says, the portrait you did of the Queen, I'm assuming you remember doing that. Oh yeah, how did it turn out? Well, you know, all the blues faded. It just looks really brown now. I'm like, oh. So, needless to say, the Queen is very upset and would like your presence as soon as possible. Right? And that kind of thing happened. You know, it sounds kind of funny, but that's like the story of Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci, famous for being an inventor, was oops, see, that's the wrong brush. That's my blue brush. And let's fix that, right? I'll just show you how we can fix our mistakes. Just get a little bit of water on here and just rub that away. I want the other brush that I've been using to blend my reds. There we go. I can see how kind of quickly I can do this type of a technique, and I can keep on building until I get a nice, really hot spot of light on the top here. I do want to wrap up ASAP, but you also want to do this relatively quickly. You can see that I'm doing the same thing on three different spheres here, but I'm not doing them all. I'm doing them each individually, right? Because otherwise they're going to start drying, and the blending process isn't going to be nearly as effective. Like, I think of, you know, Galileo, the famous astronomer, was a good friend of all of the great painters of the time in Italy, like Leonardo, Michelangelo. There was a time where they were all sitting around the dinner table with the Medici family, who were the I guess the rulers of Florence. There's a great PBS documentary called The Medicis, the Godfathers of the Renaissance. Highly recommended. But, you know, Galileo, like, if he was alive today and saw the technology with telescopes, you know, there was that new James Webb telescope that was launched into space just a few weeks ago. Like, if Galileo saw that, he would be like, are you kidding me? You launched, like, first of all, it's the biggest, like, it's infinitely bigger than any telescope he would have ever imagined on Earth, but it's been launched into space where it doesn't have to try to look through the clouds in our atmosphere, and so it gets really clear image. So Galileo would have just been shocked of that kind of technological development. And, you know, painting does appear to be like relatively unchanged for a long time, but you know, if Galileo and Leonardo got in a time machine and showed up today, they would be equally shocked by how technology has advanced in both of their respective fields. They would just be both like, whoa, that is incredible. I cannot believe that that's possible. Because Leonardo would not believe, he'd just like, okay, so wait a second, you're telling me that there's a store that sells paint in tubes? Like, you could just go there and you say, I want a red, and you can just buy a red. And when you need more, you can go back to the store and buy another tube of the exact same red. And I could start a painting on one side of the planet with red, and I could go to the other side of the planet, buy the same tube of paint in an art supply store on the other side of the planet, and I can just pick up where I left off. Right? It sounds, you know, for us it's like, yeah. That on its own is just would have, I mean, literally, if you had said that 500 years ago, you would have been arrested by the church, just like Galileo was, for saying that the Earth revolved around the sun. Like, it would have been heresy. You would have been like, you're talking nonsense. Okay. I want to do a little bit more dark. So a lot of this glazing fluid is kind of dried now. I think I'm just going to use my dark color and just glaze a little bit with that. So rather than using any other color in here, I'm just going to use the same dark color just to kind of glaze in the bottoms down here. Ah! I did it again. That's... So just adding an extra little step of darker glazing fluid. Now technically there probably would be a little bit of reflected light here, that having a yellow table, that this would have a bit of yellow in it. So I'm sure there's somebody watching right now saying, no, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Where is the reflected light? I am not gonna I'm tuning him out. I'm disliking this video. This guy is a fraud. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But again, this is our 4th class, and we're just getting started. And I think if someone is just beginning painting and can do sort of like what I'm doing right now, I mean, this is a pretty advanced series of techniques. I mean, it's not that hard. I mean, it's not super hard for me because I've been painting for 20 plus years, but if you're just starting and you can do anything approximating this, the little bit of glazing fluid in your paint, wow. Just think about what you'll be able to do in a few months. All right, and I just take a brush. Ideally, it's a little bit, like this one's kind of floppy, and it kind of helps to have something that's a little bit floppy brush, right? That's ideally what we would be using, is like this. This is called a mop brush, and I talked about that in our first episode. And a mop brush is specifically designed for blending paint. It's designed for doing washes on watercolor paintings and for doing blending with acrylic. but it's not used for mopping your floors, even though it's called a mop brush, oddly enough. Okay. How about I'm just going to do one more. I'm going to get the highlight on the other side, and then we'll sign off for the day. So it'll be done in about 5 minutes. You can see, though, that I find it very hard just to kind of stop. Once I get going, I just want to keep on going. But we're almost done here. And so just like we did with the dark color, I'm just going to take my white and we're going to put glazing fluid on that white. Knowing how much this is really the most tricky part, because how much white is in here with the glazing fluid, it's always a little tricky to know. That's why in an ideal world you just sort of go slowly. I'm just going to be a little bit more bold here. There's a lot of white in this mixture. It's a little intense, but it's intense because it's just very, very strong. There's not really... It's hard to kind of make this a little bit more subtle. Not so happy with that. So you know what? I'm just going to take a rag and I'm just going to wipe a bit of this away. Now what's happened is it's also wiped, because I didn't blow dry the surface below, it's also wiped off the previous glaze I put down there. That's okay. It's a bit of a pain in the butt, but it doesn't, it's the world is still turning as far as I know. So I'm just adding more glazing fluid in here, just diluting that so I don't have quite the super saturated. And then this is a brush that's very rough, so it's not blending as well as I would like. In fact, so I'm just going to take my mop brush . Just rub a little bit there. Just getting the tips here, that where the light is shining right off on the right hand side here. Let's see if I can make this work. I usually would blow dry this, so I'm wondering if it's gonna. Sometimes the painting. Oh, is it? Well, let me. I was gonna say, it's doing all right, and it's like, you know what? Let's just get this side done before I claim victory. Because usually that's when the painting goes, oh, you think you're so smart. Let me just Let's correct that. Okay, I think, you know what, I could keep on going. I think you understand. John says, Mark, how I want to download the video later on, can I? You mean this video that you're watching right now? I think you can download it on YouTube. I don't know how that works, but if you can figure it out, you can do it. I mean, it's always going to be available to you there on YouTube to watch as often as you like. I think what I want to do next is I'm just going to take a Sharpie, and I just want to make some notes to myself here. So this is warm yellow. This is also step one. Step one. And then this one we did this side here is here is warm. I think it's helpful to make a little notes on the back of your painting sometimes, especially when you're beginning, just to help alleviate any possible confusion that you might have, because later on, you know, you're like, oh yeah, of course I remember how to do it, and then tomorrow morning someone asks you, or you're looking at your palette and you're like, yeah, no, I don't know how that happened. How did I do that? Whoa, that's weird. So I'm trying to fix that little area there just really quickly. just before I sign off, let me just... So there was a little bit of smudge of blue, so I painted it white, and then I painted the cool red, my magenta, over top of it. And now I'm just taking my warm red, or my warm yellow, and just painting over top, right? So I'm trying to recreate those steps. And boom. It's not totally perfect, but that was that took me 30 seconds to try to fix that. Obviously, if I spend a little bit more time, it would probably be a little bit better. So, let's just take a look at these side by side here. Move a few things out of the way. So a bunch of different paintings painted in slightly different ways. Here again, we have our cold blue in the foreground, warm blue in the background, cold red in the foreground, warm red in the background. We also have two cold yellows in the foreground as the table. So from a technically these are quote unquote wrong, right? Because we're using the colors in a different way than we've used them here. But it's worth seeing that it still kind of works. Maybe not as effectively as these, and I'm sure there's probably one or two people looking at this going, I don't know, I think this one is better than the other ones. And if that's the way you see it, if that's the way that you perceive color, then by all means, I think you should embrace it and you should run with it. Having said that, these three were all approached in similar ways. This one here, we began with just a plain white background, just like this whole canvas here was done with just the white of the canvas, without any other imprimatura, without any staining or wash. And so it is effectively almost identical to this one. The only major difference being is that this one we began with a warm yellow wash, and then we painted the colors over top of it. So the differences are very small, but there are some differences. Like I do really prefer the way the blues turned out in this painting. This is just such a deeper, like much warmer blue than this one. Right? There's just like a layer of, there's a depth to this, and even in the background, that is just not something we see here. This seems just still really thin. And yes, there are three colors here. We've got two coats of this cool blue, and then again there was the warm yellow we began with, and we have two coats of the warm blue with the warm yellow we began with. So yes, there's three coats of paint here, and really only two coats of paint here. Because there was just the pure white. So maybe if we were to add a third coat of the warm blue and a third coat of the cool blue in the background, we would get something approximating this. But I still think that warm yellow is giving something a little bit intangible, something just that, again, a little bit more depth in here. Here, again, it's maybe not showing up on camera so much. The differences are very minor, not nearly as much difference. The only thing that really sticks out to me is I really see much more of the brush strokes, much more brushy quality here than here, much more even, because, again, we've got two coats of this warm yellow here. That was... this is, I guess, what not to do, and then what you could do if you didn't want to paint that imprimatura on here. And then this one here, if we, just the final one to look at is we have the really only difference is we began with a cool yellow wash, and this one's got a warm yellow wash to start, and then we develop the colors over top of it. I mean, I think for the most part this looks very similar, this looks very similar, the circles look the reds look very similar, these blues, this one does look a little bit darker, where obviously we see the difference is when we painted the warm yellow. We just painted warm yellow on top of warm yellow, versus here we're painting warm yellow over top of the cool magenta. So we've got a bit more of an orangey quality. I do think I really like the way that looks, which is why I have used a few times a cold red wash, because it does give like a kind of an extra little oomph to the paintings. Anyway, I think that is sort of, I think that's probably good enough. There's probably a lot of you like, okay, this is a long episode. So usually going forward on these Tuesday classes, because they're beginners classes, usually I'm going to try to stay around 2 to 2.5 hours maximum per episode. On Thursdays, because they're more advanced classes, sometimes they're going to be a little bit longer, 2.5, 3.5 hours long each episode. But they're much more complex, the imagery is more complex, and the techniques are more complex. But, when people are beginning, they probably want something a little bit simpler, that they can kind of begin and end, in one session after work or on a Saturday morning, etc., right? So these principles, this is sort of just a very simple little demonstration of how color temperature works. Obviously, when we actually start applying it to making paintings and recreating famous paintings, we will see this in action, as we have seen it hundreds of times already over the past couple of years together. So if you're still a little bit unsure of the difference, and I'll be honest, when I first started painting, and when I was in school and we were learning about color temperature, it was like, I guess maybe it's not really until we do a few actual paintings where you see the results and it's like, I think it maybe even not even you see that because I think trying to see one color receding and advancing, that is a little bit tricky. But when we start like trying to recreate existing paintings, and we just say, okay, let's try to mix that color in the background, and because it's in the background, it's probably going to be a cool color. Without even thinking, we start mixing it, and you're like, oh, that looks like the color. It's like, yes, because all of those great artists used this process, right? There's so very few of them that didn't use it, that they're really the exceptions to the rule. And there's only been a very small number. I think we looked at a couple of Picasso paintings where he deliberately inverted these rules, but for the most part, every artist obeys them because they work, right? Okay, so thank you everyone for painting along with me. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got a little something out of it. If you want to support the show, there's the links to the PayPal down below, even if you want to contribute as low as $1, which a number of you did last week, so I appreciate that. You can use the PayPal, or you can send an e-transfer, or send a good old-fashioned check through the mail by contacting me through my website or through the Facebook group. You can also just subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you know when the new episodes are coming. This Thursday, we're going to be painting a painting by Roy Lichtenstein, the great pop artist. Really, Andy Warhol and Roy Lichtenstein were the two great giants of pop art, the two greatest American painters of the 1960s and 70s. And we'll talk about the influence that artist had on my own life, because at one point I was a disciple of Roy Lichtenstein. So I'm super, super excited to tackle his work. And again, we're on our Thursdays for the next little while. We're also focusing on the most expensive paintings ever sold. So that painting, I think, is $150 million. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your night or morning, wherever you might happen to be. I know some of you are in the middle of the night somewhere on our beautiful planet. So if that's you, go to bed. Get some good sleep. You need it to paint. Okay, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your night, morning. We'll talk to you soon.